The moving truck departed, leaving Marcus and Chloe Bennett standing in their driveway, surrounded by cardboard boxes that seemed to multiply like rabbits when no one was looking. Their new home, a charming colonial with fresh white paint that practically screamed "respectable people live here," faced an eerily similar house across the quiet suburban street. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Chloe asked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her hazel eyes scanning the neighborhood with the cautious optimism of someone who's been disappointed just enough times to be wary. Marcus rapped, an arm around her shoulders, all confidence and cologne. "Absolutely. New city, new start. It's exactly what we needed." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, a detail Chloe had filed away in her mental drawer labeled "Things We Don't Talk About." They'd relocated after Marcus accepted a position at a prestigious architectural firm. Chloe's interior design business could operate remotely, which was convenient if not particularly fulfilling. Starting over wasn't easy, especially after 10 years of marriage that had gradually lost its spark like a firework fizzling out underwater. "Those must be our neighbors." Marcus nodded toward the house across the street. A couple emerged. The woman, tall and blonde with the kind of effortless grace that made other women simultaneously admire and resent her. The man slightly shorter, with dark hair graying at the temples in that distinguished way that only seems to benefit men. "Welcome to Oakwood Hills," the woman called, voice carrying musical notes that somehow matched her swaying sundress. "I'm Sarah Johnson, and this is my husband, John." Introductions were made with the awkward enthusiasm of people destined to become either best friends or mortal enemies. John and Sarah had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, childless by choice, as Sarah explained with a practiced smile that suggested she'd answered this question enough times to perfect the delivery. As they chatted, Marcus couldn't help but notice Sarah's captivating blue eyes. When she laughed, they crinkled at the corners in a way that made his stomach flutter unexpectedly, like a teenager with his first crush. John, meanwhile, was asking Chloe about her design work with genuine interest. "My home office could use a professional touch," he said, his voice softer than expected. Sarah's artistic talents never extended to interior spaces. By the time John and Sarah returned to their house, promising dinner the following weekend, connections had already begun to form, both innocent and dangerous, like invisible tripwires strung across their perfectly manicured lawns. 3 weeks after moving in, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah at her gallery opening. Chloe had succumbed to a migraine, and John was stranded in Chicago by thunderstorms that seemed as turbulent as the emotions brewing between the new neighbors. The gallery buzzed with energy as patrons sipped champagne and discussed art with the practiced nonchalance of people pretending to understand more than they actually did. "I'm sorry your husband couldn't make it," Marcus said, accepting a glass of champagne from Sarah, whose blue silk dress matched her eyes perfectly and clung to her figure in ways that made polite conversation increasingly difficult. "Oh, he's used to missing these events," she replied with a dismissive wave. "Sometimes I think his absence is actually a blessing. He doesn't really understand my passion for art. Not like you seem to." Her gaze lingered just long enough to make her meaning unmistakable. They walked through the gallery together, Sarah explaining each piece with enthusiasm. Marcus found himself drawn less to the artwork and more to her animated expressions, the way she touched his arm lightly when emphasizing a point, the subtle jasmine perfume that lingered like a ghost when she moved past him. After the event, they ended up at a small wine bar, conversations flowing as easily as the Cabernet. The space was intimate, low lighting, secluded booths, and a jazz trio playing softly, as if providing a soundtrack to their growing attraction. "It's strange," Sarah said, her fingers playing with the stem of her wine glass, occasionally brushing against his hand. "I feel like I've known you much longer than a few weeks." Marcus nodded, leaning closer. "There's something about you that feels familiar, comfortable, but also exciting." Their eyes met, and the air between them changed, charged with something dangerous and electric. Sarah's foot found his under the table, her ankle sliding against his in a gesture that couldn't be misinterpreted. "Another drink?" Marcus asked, already knowing they were crossing into treacherous territory. Sarah smiled, decision made in the curve of her lips. "Why don't we continue this conversation somewhere more private? My office at the gallery has a very comfortable sofa." The short walk back felt like crossing a point of no return. Inside her office, Sarah locked the door, the click of the deadbolt, sounding like a final decision. The first kiss was tentative, a testing of boundaries. The second was not. Glasses were set aside as hands began to explore with increasing urgency. Sarah's silk dress rustled as Marcus found the zipper, her own fingers working at his shirt buttons with practiced precision. "I've been thinking about this since I first saw you," she whispered against his neck. The office sofa proved comfortable indeed, though comfort was hardly their priority as they surrendered to months of built-up tension. Sarah was uninhibited in her passion, guiding his hands where she wanted them, whispering instructions that made his heart race. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. Their union was desperate and urgent, both aware they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Sarah arched beneath him, her nails leaving crescent marks on his shoulders, her whispered encouragements driving him to a frenzy. When release came, it was with an intensity that left them both momentarily speechless. That night began an affair that consumed them both. Sarah's gallery became their usual meeting place, her office providing the privacy they craved. The antique desk that had belonged to her grandfather became the stage for their afternoon liaisons, papers pushed aside to make room for more primal concerns. Sometimes, when John was traveling and Chloe was visiting her mother, they would risk meeting at Sarah's house, the forbidden nature of their encounters only heightening their desire. They learned each other's bodies with scholarly attention, Marcus discovering the sensitive spot behind Sarah's ear that made her gasp, Sarah learning exactly how to touch him to delay their pleasure until neither could stand the tension any longer. "What are we doing?" Marcus asked one afternoon, watching Sarah dress, admiring the elegant line of her spine. She turned, still buttoning her blouse, and offered the smile that had become his addiction. "Living," she replied simply. "Just living." While Marcus was discovering new passions with Sarah, Chloe found herself increasingly drawn to John Johnson. What began as professional consultations about his home office design evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either had anticipated. Their first meeting had been perfectly innocent. John had called Chloe asking if she might offer some professional advice on his home office. "It's become a catch-all space," he explained, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "I spend more time there than anywhere else in the house, but it's the one room Sarah has never bothered to make comfortable." The office was indeed a disaster. Beautiful, bones buried under stacks of financial reports and furniture that clearly prioritized function over form, but the large bay window overlooking the garden held promise, and Chloe immediately saw possibilities. "You need a space that nurtures creativity while maintaining efficiency," she told him, making notes as she circled the room. "The right lighting, ergonomic seating, proper desk setup, and definitely some life in here. Plants thrive in this northern exposure." That first consultation led to coffee meetings and long conversations that revealed how much they had in common. John was different from Marcus in every way. Where Marcus was charismatic and sometimes superficial, John was thoughtful and profound. He listened when Chloe spoke, really listened, asking questions that showed he valued her thoughts in a way that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. "I've always wanted to visit the Amalfi Coast," Chloe mentioned during one of their coffee meetings. "The architecture, the colors, the way buildings seem to grow from the cliffs." A week later, John presented her with a glossy photography book of Italian coastal towns. "For inspiration," he said, almost shy. "Both for your designs and perhaps for future travels." The thoughtfulness of his gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. When was the last time Marcus had paid such attention to her dreams? Their friendship deepened over shared books, philosophical discussions, and long walks through the neighborhood park. John confided in her about his marriage, how he and Sarah had drifted apart over the years, becoming more like roommates than spouses. "We stopped really seeing each other," he explained one evening as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset. "Now we just occupy the same space." Chloe recognized the same pattern in her relationship with Marcus. Neither spoke of it aloud, but both understood they were finding in each other what they had lost in their marriages. Yet, unlike Marcus and Sarah, their connection remained emotional rather than physical, perhaps making it all the more powerful. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd met someone like you earlier," John said one rainy afternoon as they sat in a quiet corner of the local bookstore. Chloe's heart raced at his words, but she only squeezed his hand in response, knowing that crossing that final line would change everything. For months, the two couples maintained their outward appearances with practiced precision. They shared dinner parties that were masterclasses in subtext, Sarah preparing gourmet meals that gave her excuses to brush against Marcus, Chloe and John discussing books and conversations that excluded their spouses without seeming to do so. Faunerie. Facade might have continued indefinitely if not for an ordinary Tuesday in April, when spring rain fell in sheets against windows. John had forgotten important documents at home and returned unexpectedly. As he entered through the garage, he heard sounds from upstairs that initially confused him. Following the noise to the guest bedroom, rarely used and far from the master bedroom, he pushed open the door. The scene that greeted him seared itself into his memory. His wife, blonde hair spilling across pillows, legs wrapped around Marcus, as he moved above her. The room smelled of Sarah's expensive perfume, mingled with the unmistakable scent of passion. The world seemed to stop. Sarah gasped, scrambling for covers. Marcus turned, seeing John in the doorway, frozen in shock. "John," Sarah began, but he was already gone, the front door slamming behind him with a finality that seemed to mark the end of 15 years of marriage. Disoriented and betrayed, John drove aimlessly before finding himself outside Chloe's favorite coffee shop. Acting on instinct, he texted her, "Can you meet me? It's important." Across town, Chloe was experiencing her own revelation. While searching for tax documents in Marcus's office, she discovered a hidden compartment in his desk drawer. Inside was a box containing hotel receipts, elegant earrings she didn't recognize, and handwritten notes on expensive stationery. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the most recent note. "Yesterday was heavenly. The way you touched me still lingers. Same time tomorrow? I can't wait to feel you inside me again. S." When John's text arrived, Chloe was sitting on the floor, the evidence spread around her like puzzle pieces finally assembled into a complete picture. They met at the coffee shop 30 minutes later. John arrived first, his face ashen. Chloe entered with her hair dampened by rain, carrying the wooden box like it contained toxic material. "Sarah and Marcus," John said simply. Chloe nodded, sliding the box across the table. "I found this today. I should have seen it sooner." "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "About 5 minutes longer than you," she replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I suspect part of me has known for months." "You?" "I walked in on them. In our guest bedroom. 20 minutes ago." They sat in silence, processing the collapse of their marriages. Then John reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said. "But I'm not sorry that it brought us closer." That evening, 4 people faced the consequences of their choices with varying degrees of courage. When Marcus returned home, Chloe was waiting, the box of evidence placed prominently on the kitchen island. "How could you?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. Marcus didn't try to deny it. "I don't know what to say." "John knows too," she informed him. "He saw you today." Marcus sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "It wasn't planned. It just happened. Things like this don't—" just happen, Marcus," Chloe replied, anger creeping into her voice. "You made choices, repeatedly." "I don't know," he admitted. "It started as something physical, but it became more. You're in love with her." It wasn't a question. Marcus met her eyes directly. "I think I might be. Are you in love with John?" The question blindsided her. "What?" "Please, Chloe. I've seen how you look at him, how you light up when he calls or texts." She wanted to deny it, but found she couldn't lie. "I haven't slept with him," she said instead, "but you wanted to." Again, not a question. Across the street, a similar scene unfolded. Sarah found John sitting in their darkened living room. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked when she entered. Sarah's defenses rose immediately. "Like you're so innocent. I've seen how you look at Chloe." "I never betrayed our vows," John replied calmly. "But you're right that Chloe and I have grown close. She understands me in ways you stopped trying to years ago." By morning, temporary arrangements had been made. Marcus would stay with a colleague and Sarah would visit her sister, while everyone decided their next steps. The most surprising dinner party in Oakwood. Hill's history took place 2 weeks later when Chloe invited all four to meet at an upscale restaurant downtown. Her reasoning: closure required honesty from all parties. They sat awkwardly at a corner table, two couples whose lives had become irreversibly entangled. "I think we should acknowledge what's happened and discuss where we go from here," Chloe began. "We're all adults who made choices that affected each other." The conversation that followed was raw, honest, and ultimately liberating. They spoke of unmet needs, the gradual erosion of their marriages, and the human tendency to seek connection wherever it might be found. "I think we've all been unhappy for longer than we care to admit," John observed. "Perhaps what happened was inevitable in some form." By the time dessert arrived, an unexpected peace had settled over the table. No one was blameless, but understanding had begun to replace anger. As they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled Chloe aside. "I do love you, you know, just not in the way you deserve." Chloe nodded. "I know. I think I feel the same way about you." The divorce proceedings were remarkably amicable. Within 6 months, papers were signed, assets divided, and new beginnings planned. Marcus and Sarah purchased a modern loft in the city's arts district, closer to her gallery and his firm. Their relationship, built initially on physical attraction, evolved into something deeper once brought into the light. Their passion didn't diminish once the secrecy was removed. Sarah would often visit Marcus at his office after hours, clearing his drafting table before climbing onto it, skirt hiked around her hips as he stood between her legs, mouth finding hers. They christened every room of their new loft within the first week, discovering each other with the same enthusiasm but without the shadow of guilt. "We're the same kind of selfish," Sarah once joked post-intimacy, tracing patterns on his chest. "That makes us surprisingly compatible." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. They both pursued what they wanted with unapologetic determination. Sarah's spontaneity complemented his creativity, pushing him to take professional risks he'd previously avoided. Meanwhile, John and Chloe moved more slowly. After his divorce was finalized, John accepted a position in Portland, close enough to visit, but far enough for a fresh start. Chloe enrolled in a graduate program in sustainable design at Portland State University, pursuing a dream Marcus had subtly discouraged. They maintained their connection through weekend visits and long phone calls. John would send her photos of interesting architectural details from his morning runs. Chloe would mail him samples of sustainable materials she was studying. Their first kiss didn't come until 3 months after both divorces were finalized, during a weekend when Chloe visited Portland to help John furnish his new apartment. "I've been wanting to do this for so long," he said, his voice uncertain in a way that made Chloe's heart ache with tenderness. "What's been stopping you?" she asked, stepping closer. "Fear, I suppose. Fear that what we have might change if we cross this line." Chloe smiled, reaching up to trace his jaw. "Some changes are worth the risk." Their first kiss was tentative, a careful exploration rather than desperate passion. It deepened gradually, both taking their time. When they finally made their way to John's bedroom, the intimacy they shared was an extension of their emotional connection, thoughtful, tender, and profound in its sincerity. Where Marcus and Sarah's connection burned hot and fast, John and Chloe's love grew steadily, rooted in mutual respect and genuine understanding. "Do you ever regret how we found each other?" John asked one evening as they walked along Portland's waterfront. Chloe considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain, but not the outcome. Does that make me a terrible person?" John pulled her close. "If it does, then we're terrible together, and I can live with that." 1 year after the revelations that changed everything, Chloe received a wedding invitation from Marcus and Sarah. The gesture surprised her, but also brought a sense of closure. "Are we going?" John asked, watching her expression. "I think we should," Chloe replied. "It feels like the final chapter of a very strange book." The wedding was held at Sarah's gallery, transformed for the evening into an elegant venue. Walking in together, John and Chloe felt oddly at peace with the circumstances that had brought them all to this point. During the reception, Chloe found herself alone with Marcus for the first time in months. "You look happy," he said, studying her with genuine interest. "I am," she replied, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him now. "You look happy, too." Marcus glanced across the room at Sarah, radiant in her blue wedding dress. "Happier than I expected to be. How about you and John?" "It's different," Chloe said thoughtfully. "John understands me in a way I didn't know was possible." "We were both with the wrong people, weren't we?" "I wouldn't say wrong, exactly. Maybe we were right for each other at one point, but people change. We grew in different directions." Marcus raised his champagne glass. "To finding the right ones, even if we took a complicated path to get there." Chloe clinked her glass against his. "To complicated paths." Later that night, as John drove them back to their hotel, Chloe rested her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That sometimes life takes you exactly where you need to go, even when you think you're completely lost." John took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Then I'm glad we got lost together." 5 years later, the two couples had settled into lives that suited them perfectly. Marcus and Sarah thrived in the art world, his architectural innovations complementing her gallery's reputation. They traveled extensively, lived passionately, and never regretted the storm that had brought them together. John and Chloe married in a small ceremony in her mother's garden. They welcomed a daughter named Hope, a name chosen for its significance in their journey. John's financial expertise and Chloe's design talents combined in a successful, sustainable housing initiative that brought them professional fulfillment alongside personal happiness. Occasionally, the four would meet at professional events. These meetings were cordial, even warm, though always tinged with awareness of their complicated history. "Do you think we would have found each other without them?" Chloe asked John once, after running into Marcus and Sarah at an exhibition. John considered the question as they walked back to their hotel, Hope skipping ahead. "I don't know, but I'm grateful for where we ended up, however we got here." Chloe squeezed his hand. "Some flowers only bloom after a forest fire." "Are you calling our ex-spouses a natural disaster?" John asked, laughing. "Maybe," Chloe replied with a smile that held no bitterness. "But some natural disasters clear the way for new growth." And that perhaps was the truest way to understand what had happened on that quiet suburban street, where two houses faced each other across an ordinary road, and four lives became irreversibly intertwined.